The one question that I get asked most about, especially lately for whatever reason, getting a lot of emails on dudes that are having problems with snare buzz. So instead of answering the same question 50 times, I thought I would just finally do a full-on tutorial on reducing the amount of snare buzz. You don't want to eliminate snare buzz, because I mean, it's part of what makes a snare a snare. You're going to want some buzz there happening, because that's, you know, that's what makes it what it is. But it can be excessive at some times, and you can get some unwanted buzz when you're not really looking for it. So I'm going to give you a full tutorial on snare buzz. This is going to be detailed. So your warning right now for those of y'all that have problems with informative, long lessons, go ahead and find a shorter one. That's up to you. But for the rest of y'all that would like to learn about what causes it, and if you want a few solutions on how you can get rid of it, that's what this is for. Now, the drag about snare buzz is that it's really hard to pinpoint what's causing it. But for the most part, there's only one real thing that causes snare buzz, and that's frequency. Everything in the room vibrates at a certain frequency, and your snares are no different. Your snare is sitting at a particular frequency, and then when something else hits that same frequency, it causes your snares to go nuts, and that's when they start buzzing. So it doesn't make any difference what it is. Bass guitar, could be, you know, one of your toms, whatever. Like anything that gets in that range is going to cause your snares to buzz. So for an example, let's use this one. I got a snare here. This is my main snare. And I'm going to do a little demonstration here. It's going to look a little weird, but this is just to sort of give you an example of what I'm talking about. Hopefully you'll be able to hear the snares when I hit it. But basically all I'm going to do is going to do a little frequency sweep. And when I hit the range that this particular snare is in, you'll hear the snares start to get a little more active. All right, so here we go. So right there, you hear that? So whatever that note was, all I got to do to get rid of that is make sure that none of my toms are sitting in that range. And that's basically it. So the whole thing about snare buzz, again, is there's a frequency in the room that your snare likes. And once it gets in that range, whatever it is that's causing it, your snares are going to start to ring. So in that respect, for the most part, fixing the problem ain't that hard, really. All you have to do is find out whatever it is that's causing that ring and tune it out of that range. You can either tune your snare up or down to get it out of there, or, you know, one of your toms is probably interfering. I would suggest finding something other than touching your snare, because your snare is the core of your drum sound. So last thing you want to do is compromise, you know, your snare sound just for the sake of getting rid of snare buzz. You don't want to do that. So I would much sooner start with my toms, tune it slightly up, slightly down, whatever. Just get it out of that range so it's not causing your snares to buzz anymore. If your floor tom is the one that's the culprit, then you probably have your snare tuned pretty low, and your floor tom is just hitting that frequency range and it's causing it to ring. So you can either tune your tom up a little bit, or you can tune your snare up a little bit, or whatever. But one of those two has to get out of that range so that they can stop interfering with each other. Snare wires. Let's talk about wires for a second. Because a lot of times the problem could be lying right within the wires. Now, I used to think that, believe it or not, I used to think that your wires weren't that big of a deal. When I worked in a drum shop, I used to see these wires come in and they were like 45 bucks, 50 bucks. I'm like, what difference does it make what kind of wires you have on there? Later on, I found out, huge. They make a big difference. If you got good quality wires in your snare is just going to end up sounding better, and it's going to be a little less troublesome, especially when we're talking about stuff like snare buzz and stuff like that. So anyways, as far as the wires go, a lot of times the snare buzz is coming from the wires itself because they're cheap. They're cheap, they're poorly made for whatever reason. And fixing it can just be a matter of swapping them out for better ones. Now, it can be sort of narrowed down to how the wires are installed. So we'll talk about the difference between strap and string. Now on this snare, these wires are attached with string. You have the option here, every set of wires will give you this option. You can either attach it by string, like that, or there's a slot for a single strap that you can attach it. The issue with string is, when you install the wires with string, you got to be pinpoint accurate as far as straightness goes. Because the problem you can run into when they're not straight is that you'll end up with a couple of strands being loose. I don't know if you can see that from here, but take a look at these wires. These wires, when they're sitting on your snare drum, they have to be, as far as the tension goes, like I'm pulling on both sides here, it has to be 100% even. It can't be askew this way or anything like that, because once that happens, like check this out, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm putting even tension on both sides. If it's sitting on your snare and it's not 100% straight, I'm just going to do a little, you see that right there? How the ones on the end are kind of shaking? It didn't take a lot to do that. But if you installed your wires and they're uneven like that, one side is going to be loose, and regardless of what you do, when you tighten it, they're still going to be loose and they're going to start buzzing on you. So that's the first thing to look at, is to make sure that, your snare wires, when they're installed, once you change them anyway, make sure that the tension is 100% even on both sides. The basic rule of thumb with snare wires is actually pretty simple, and it makes sense too. The less strands you have, the less buzz you're going to end up getting. The more strands you have, the more susceptible to buzz they're going to be. So switching to a smaller strand set of wires will almost completely solve your problem that way. I think the smallest number of strands you can get for a 14-inch snare, I think, is like 16. So if you got 24s on there right now, if you move down to a 16, you can almost surely solve that problem as far as buzz goes. So that's the one thing. For those of you guys that like the 42-strand snare wires, if you know what you're doing when you install those things, you shouldn't really have a problem. But with 42-strand snare wires, your snares are going to be a lot more sensitive, which is cool, and they'll be a lot more active. But again, there's a better chance they're going to start buzzing, once something gets inside that frequency. So they might be a little bit harder to control, depending. But that's the deal with the number of strands on your snare wires. So again, switching to a smaller number of strands on your wires can help solve that problem. So let me give you a couple of solutions, things that you can try. I'm sure one of which will help you with your snare buzz problem. But one thing that you can do, this works for a lot of people. This is a 10 lug snare. You can try this with an 8 as well, but if you got a 10 especially, one thing you can do is detune the lugs or the tension rods on either side of the snare bed. When you reduce the tension, surrounding your wires, that a lot of times will help. You don't have to go crazy loosening them, but just detune them and then give your snare a couple of hits or play your kit a little bit. You might notice a moderate to significant reduction in snare buzz. So just take a key, take these 4 and loosen them off a little bit. That might be one thing. Another thing you can do, of course, is just detune one of your toms, because it's likely that one of those are the source of your problem. If you got a lot of racks up top, take a look at them, the 8, the 10, the 12, whatever, and just give them a hit. Go through each one and find out which one is really getting in the way of that snare, and then just tune it out of the range. Another thing you can do, of course, is just go out, spend 20 bucks, 25 bucks on a good quality, smaller set of wires. So switch to a 16 if you've got a 24 or a 20. Go down to a 16 if you want and experiment with that. If you have old wires at home too, you can convert these if you're real careful. All you got to do is snip off, these 2 end ones on either end, and you can create your own set of reduced wires just by doing that. Snip off the last 2 on each end and make your own smaller set of wires. That's another thing. But again, less strands, less buzz. Another fix that you can try, it's not my favorite solution, but some drummers will take a towel and they'll sort of drape it somewhere in this area. Like if your problem is being caused by one of the toms, you don't feel like changing the tuning or whatever, you can get a towel and sort of put a little barrier between your snare and your tom just by draping it over and just taping it there. I personally haven't done that before, but I've heard that that it works for some people. So that's another thing you can try. It's not my favorite solution again, but that might work. So that's basically all there is, man. I mean, it's going to be tough to pinpoint where it's coming from, but you just have to remember that snare buzz is generally caused by frequency interference. Something is causing your snares to go nuts in the room. So you just got to pinpoint it, figure out what it is. Sometimes it's your bass player. What are you going to do? If that's the case, you're playing on stage, it's not going to matter that much anyway. It's going to be enough noise to hide it. So don't hate on snare buzz too much, but you can eliminate some of the excess just by taking some of these steps and experimenting with a couple of different things. But one of those solutions should help solve your problem. So give them a shot. Hopefully that works for you.